All right, hello in Twitch land. We're starting a little bit early today just because I've got a lot to do. I know we're slotted to start at noon, but I wanted to get busy because I do have a lot to do. And I've got a lot of the same stuff that we have been working on that I am looking forward to getting over the finish line. We've got some miniatures that we need to do some non-metallic metal gold on, and then just a couple of different things on different miniatures. So I'm just going to be diving right in. My donkeys here. The last two things that I need to get done are these bottles or jugs, and then the rope on said jugs. And I had an idea in my head how I wanted to do these, what I wanted them to look like. But I wasn't exactly sure how to do it, so it took me a bit to really look at my paints, come up with the color palette that I wanted to use. So I'm starting these out with just a khaki highlight. Then after these jugs are done, then we've just got to do the rope. And these donkeys here have taken a lot longer than I anticipated. All of the little bits on them. Trying to make sure there's good differentiation and some good interesting color, and to be able to tell them apart from each other, because I was thinking about at the table how would the players interact with them. So for me, myself, I have got names for them for differentiation. You've got blue, because it's got blue kind of wrappings on there. I was trying to go for like tarps. And Yule, Y-U-L-E, blue and Yule, because it's red and green. So those are the donkeys. And let's see, in addition to that, I've got so many different things to work on today. Pardon me. So many different things. I don't know exactly where to start. That's gold and brown for the bow and the arrows. And then on the cloak, we're going to do some symbology. That'll be last. We've got the hair to do on there. I'm thinking we're going to jump to our paladin, however. And we've still got the non-metallic metal golds to do on here, but also the hair. And the hair I want to get over the finish line. Move that handle there. I don't have anything on those bases. So for this one here, I'm going to use the Blonde Triad, also from Reaper. And we're just going to do blonde hair. This one I'm really looking forward to getting done. I have a feeling with the non-metallic metal golds that we'll be doing and the blonde hair, we will be able to have this one all completed today. That is my goal. I would like to get it posted up to Instagram this evening. We will see. I debated on whether or not to enter this one into the MSP contest. So ReaperCon is just around the corner now. The weekend of Labor Day, starting just before the weekend of Labor Day. And the MSP painting contest occurs at that time. I've been working on a couple of miniatures for that painting contest, a couple of dioramas, as well as a couple of just miniatures themselves. But this one I have been pretty happy with overall how she's been coming out. So there was a part of me that debated, should I enter this one as well? But there are a couple of mold lines that didn't get cleaned up as well as I'd hoped. Too much there. So I decided I am not going to enter this one into the contest just because that'll hurt the score a little bit. And the other ones that I have been working on, I don't have that same issue with the mold line. So with the contest, I want to really enter my best, my absolute best. So this one here, while it has been fun and very unique and different and interesting, I think, maybe I will just bring it along to put on my table for people just to look at. So that's kind of my thoughts. That way people can still see it. I'll still have it at the convention, but I won't be judged on it. Because like I said, I am overall really happy with how she's coming out. But again, that Standard of entering the absolute best of the best that you've painted is kind of the key. And I think the others that I've been working on are just a hair, just a smidge. Comparatively cleaner on that midline. Or mold line. Midline, geez. Yeah, this one's funky a little bit as far as color goes. Excuse me, because I only have the one blonde. I don't want to use blonde on the elf just because the cloak is yellow. This gentleman here, I suppose I could do his mustache in blonde, but usually for facial hair, especially for blonde people, I know because I'm blonde, you get a lot more ruddy color in it. So it's a lot different than the hair on your head. Although it would stand out really well from the purple, I suppose. But prior to doing that, I would want to do the fur on the outer coat, which I want to do in a nice dark browns, almost like buffalo. So I probably will not do that. Let's see, let's do a little bit of prepping up on our golds. We've got a lot that need some non-metallic metal golds. And again, I am just using the Reaper Triad for the non-metallic metal gold. It is what I prefer to use. But not coming out super great. So let's get a little bit of this up off the wet palette with paper towel. I didn't hit these with the Vertex, so a little bit of separation going on. That's better. Just a real good shake, and they'll be good to go. And switch to a size 0 brush. And we'll start laying down. Now I've already done a little bit on some of these for the shadow color from when we were doing our Rask. But we want to lay down the shadow color really nice. Make sure it's nice and even, opaque. If you are happening to be at ReaperCon, if you're in one of my classes that I'll be teaching, look forward to seeing you. I'm working on all of the handouts currently that we'll be using in the class. Those should be completed this week. Of course, those are just going to be printed out materials you can use in class as well as keep with you, going over the subjects that we'll be reviewing. My classes this year, I've got one just about adding contrast. I've got one all about how to paint the most challenging colors of reds, yellows, and blacks. I've got one that's focused just on eyes. I've got one that's just more of a panel piece about prepping up Bones miniatures. And I've got one, gosh, I'm trying to think now. Can't even think of all the classes. Anyhow, really good subjects. Of course, I'm not the only teacher there. There are going to be a lot of talented artists who are going to be teaching courses. If you're interested, make sure you go to Reaper Miniatures for information. Now, they are not a sponsor. I am just a absolute fan of the company and the products that they put out. I should, at some point, move some of these miniatures onto my other handle preppers so I don't have to do quite as much juggling. With the handle.
Gonna do a shortcut. Where's the claw clip thingy?
The what?
Claw clip thingy. Is this it?
Yeah.
Actually have a use for it.
Very nice. And just getting that gold base on. overpainting here a little bit because the size of this cap versus the stick, the walking stick. I think I'll be able to control the brush better when I'm doing the stick part. I thought about doing the studs in those sleeves, those rolled leather sleeves, as gold, but because it's brown, I actually am not going to do that. I'm going to do those as a non-metallic metal silver instead, just because it'll have more contrast to that brown than the gold would. And on this gem, we'll do the base part. So this is the facet that holds that big fat gem. So this miniature, we actually built a character based on this miniature, but I am actually looking forward to using him as an NPC. I think he's got a lot of character, and I can't wait to introduce him into some of my campaigns. And our sun elf here. We've got a lot of work to do on this one yet, but he is getting closer and closer and closer. This is another one of those of trying to decide how much to do on him, because this one is not a commission or anything. And so for me personally, I would use him as an NPC in my tabletop games. And generally I don't paint NPCs like super detailed or anything, but this sculpt is super interesting. I love the I've got a number of this style of elf. We've painted one previously. That video is on our YouTube channel, but I just really like the thought of sun elves rather than just my forest elves or my wood elves, and so I'm using this more to challenge myself, but generally I would not spend as much time on painting an NPC. However, because I'm using this miniature really to challenge myself with more bold colors and trying to push myself into painting those more bold colors, I am spending a lot more time on it than I normally would. This is actually a good indicator of how much time I spend on one of my commission pieces, because I want to have a lot of good detail work, really good smooth blends. Oh, messed up there. Nice and clean paint job, obviously. Making any mistakes, clean them up right away. So very, very representative to a commissioned miniature. And with these non-metallic metals, try to keep them in line. To paint them all consistently, so if I do any off blends or anything, I've got them all on the table at once. Ooh, all right, let's go back to our burrows. So this one's going to be a little funky in that I'm going to do a wash on this. I'm not super worried about that upper end. I'm still painting it, but I'm not super worried about it. This is really more for the lower 2/3. The upper part, I am actually going to paint it a more brown, a Griffin brown. Soak up the excess. I'll blow on that a little bit just so I can show you kind of what I'm thinking. Let that off color dry up a little bit. These donkeys, I tell you what, these have been really interesting to paint because they're not a PC or anything, again, just an NPC, but I'm putting in a lot of time on the detail aspects of it, which normally I don't with my NPCs, but I want these to get a lot of table time use. So all right, now we'll go back to our original khaki highlight. It's a little thick, a little thick. Let me thin that down a little bit. There we go. Just for a little bit better blend. Dimple that edge a little bit. And we're going to do the same here. I'm going to use that thinned aspect that I've just mixed. That gives us a good shadow. Up into a good highlight color. Let those dry a bit. Let's blend a little bit of our shadow and midtone on our non-metallic metal gold. And go right back in the line. Now with your non-metallic metals, of course, the one thing you have to think about is the direction the light is coming from, how it's going to reflect. So for our shadow colors, your brighter colors are going to be moving up. The amount of shadow color that you leave versus your first blend determines how shiny that gold is going to be. The smaller the shadow color that you leave, the brighter the gold, or the shinier, I suppose, is the better way to say that. So for your buckles and things like that, you really want to think about how much sheen you want those to have. Same with your pommels. This is where you can start putting in some elements of shape. So I want this to look like it's kind of flaring to the center. So I'm going to leave the shadow color just in the middle of that hilt. Except on the sides, I'm going to build it up so it looks like it flares out. The more centralized you go. So it will get the highlights towards the center. Now this is a challenge because we've got literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of paint that we want to paint. So it's a lot of paint, and this is generally in the smallest area. The smallest detail. With a lot of layers. So it can be kind of challenging. There are times where you want to skip some of these layers. Not have as many blends. Those rivets, for example, as they go down, they get smaller and smaller. This blade we're going to do a little bit differently. Lots and lots and lots of little bits on these miniatures. And this really is where you start having to decide how much you want to spend on times like this. Are you rushing to get them to the table? Are you needing these to be as detailed? Is a speed paint going to get you the results you want? Sometimes you don't have to do quite as much. But it all depends on how much time you want to put in on it, what those results are going to look like for you. All right, let's go back to some blonde hair. Now this is a blend of our shadow and midtone. So we want to start a little bit of what I call a halo effect around the crown. Now this miniature has some very, I would say, aggressively sculpted hair. So lots of strands carved very, very deep. Now depending on the miniature, that can be good or bad, and your painting technique as well. For things like washes, this is fantastic because you can do a base coat and then do a wash to drive in shadows in those stranded areas. For my favorite technique, this is a little more challenging, just because I want those shadows, but I want more like patches, I guess, of hair is the best way to call it. And then I do the same working towards the ends. Hair is the other class that I'll be teaching. Now that I'm working on hair, I'm doing a class on painting hair. I call it Luscious Locks. So that class, if you have challenge painting hair, and my courses are all for beginners. So if you have just started miniature painting or haven't really taken it too seriously, but you want to improve some of your techniques, that's how I kind of target my classes that I'll be teaching. They are literally beginner classes. If you have never held a brush in your hand, if you've only recently started painting, then those will be good courses for you. I know it's kind of challenging to see these miniatures at this level on the screen. Of course, I do have an Instagram that you can find those miniatures on. I'm actually going to leave that one on there because we'll go back to gold here in a minute. Let's go back to the donkeys. We've got the donkeys coming right along. We've got those jugs with kind of a cream color overall. Now I'm going to use that straight Griffin brown. I am just going to paint the upper portion of that jug. With that Griffin brown. Just that upper portion. And same with this one. Just that upper portion. Let those dry. Now I've got a blend of the Griffin Brown and my khaki highlight. We'll get to that here in a bit. Going back to our gold, we're at the midtones now. This is just straight non-metallic metal gold base coat. Now again, depending on this element will depend on how much sheen we build into our gold. Faster highlights mean a shinier gold. Slower highlights mean a duller gold. And with the gold, I want to keep these blends as smooth as possible. Of course, we're working on extremely small areas. So it isn't always very possible. Easiest way to think about your non-metallic highlights is really how bright and shiny or grimy do you want them to appear. That's going to determine how much of your previous layers you cover. Ooh. All right, let's go to our elf. You can see a lot of this is just very repetitive as we are working on these miniatures. Very repetitive, especially when you're working on multiple ones at once. Now you can change it up. If I were to work on the non-metallic metal, for instance, and we've got our Cyclops, right? I'm still working on skin tones there. It gives you an opportunity to change out the aspects that you're painting so you don't get like bogged down doing the same thing over and over and over again. It really depends for me on my mood. There are times where I want to work on the same thing until I'm sick of it because it's great practice. There are times where, like, man, if I do another bit of gold, I am going to scream. So it varies. The biggest thing is just don't get discouraged. Each of these goes through a couple of ugly stages. Anytime you're painting miniatures, you'll have some ugly stages where you're like, oh, that does not look right. You got to keep pushing through. It can be a little challenging, but in the long run it pays off. Don't second guess yourself. Push through, push through, push through. So this one here, because we're at the midtone, we'll start adding to these smaller bits here, these decorative rivets. And only the large one is the only one where we did that a blended piece, that low tone blend. Using this midtone is where you get to start to shape a little bit more. So be very careful in your application where you're popping this. But you start to get a lot more detail showing. The shadows really sticking out. So I don't know how well, again, this is going to show on the camera. But you can start adding in more curvature, highlighting the curvature in the aspects. So that kind of leaf on the quiver, the hilt in the sword, makes quite a bit of difference. Start determining where we want to highlight. Start pulling the paint in that direction. These small little details are definitely the most challenging, in my opinion. But they have the biggest impact to your finished miniature. So you definitely want to be mindful of the paint that you're laying down. Now that dwarf, we did not do that blended piece on his couple of pieces of gold. And that's really because they're so small, and many of them are really, this is the only one that's got like exposure. This little like clasp thing on the back. And it doesn't give us much room to do as much, I suppose. It does not give us as much room to do some of the real good shading aspects of non-metallic metal. So I skipped that center part and went right for the mid-tone. And then we'll also skip the next blend and go right to the high tone. Let's do our mid-tone on our hair. So this is the mid-tone on hair. So this aspect here, I will start paying more attention to the sculpted aspects of the hair. As much as possible. Highlighting individual strands a little bit more. It gives us that good kind of sunken crown look. And then curvature. So hair, important aspect to think about with hair is it generally is lighter at the base, the bottom. But depending on how the hair is moving, it will catch the light differently. So you've got to be cognizant of how is the hair going to shine in the light. How do I paint that on that miniature? Because we're moving fast on this hair, I'm actually going to do the high tone, which this is a blend of our mid and highlight. Still following the same pattern. little thick, just drawing on the palette. Thin it out just a little bit. Here I want to be as smooth as possible on single strands. And of course the base of that hair. And then we will do the highlight last. This will let us finish out the hair. So our highlight is really going to be very minute. Following that halo that we did around the center. Hitting the highest points. And the furthest edges of the hair. Now if this were a smoother sculpt, but with a little bit broader opportunity, if it had longer hair, I'd be able to stretch out these highlights and everything a little bit more. And then I could do one more layer of highlight with a white, just like a pure white, and the highlight color to really make it that much more sheen to the hair. And we're going to mix up our non-metallic metal gold highlight and mid-tone to give us that high tone, is what I call it. And this is going to almost have us done with our non-metallic metal golds. Then we've got one more tone to do. We'll have some beautiful gold work done. And then on this one here, we do have it so close. We've got a little bit of wood that we've got to do along with the bow on our Sun Elf. Our Fighting Merchant here, we've got quite a bit to do yet. We've still got some fur. With a feather in his cap, a walking stick. I want to touch up just a little bit on the fur, on the purple cloak. Touch up just a little bit on the pouch that he has. And then of course we still got the studs on his sleeve, the large gem. Quite a bit yet to do on him. But he is getting much closer. Much closer. Of course his facial hair, I still can't decide. Do I want him to have gray? Thinking gray, because I want him to be, he is that retired adventurer. So that's kind of the direction I'm leaning with that. Get this little bit here. let's jump back to our burrows here. I'm going to use that blend that we did. Just touch up a little bit of the highest points on this. On the upper area that we painted with the Griffin brown, just to build in a little bit of highlight on both of those. Now the fun part, well, I don't know if I'm going to do it. I thought about putting like the 3 X's for liquor. I thought about putting the 3 X's on there. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to. Thought it'd be more fun than anything else, and these ones here I'm pretty done with. I'm pretty done with. Next I want to do the rope, and we'll have that done. But let's push through and finish this non-metallic metal gold for the day. So this is the highlight point. Now depending on how you want this application to come on, you don't want this to be a point of light. If you're doing that, you want to follow up with just a splash, just a dot of pure white. This is definitely your highest point of the gold itself, but is not a reflection. So bring it in and blend it really nice and smooth. And this is going to determine the shiniest point. So depending on how much sheen you want will determine how much of this and where you're putting it. Keep it nice and thin. Very purposeful on where you're adding it. I'll flash these on screen here after we finish all of them with their highlights. And of course, when they're all done, they will be posted to my Instagram. This video will be on YouTube probably within 2 weeks. It takes me a little bit to get these moved over. Ooh. Because the shield is very big, has a lot of surface to it, I'm actually going to go through and just add in another layer of the same, just to really make sure that highlight point is nice and vibrant. Make sure the edges are pretty clean. Good transitions. All right, now let's do a quick review of what we got done today on the donkeys. We've got those jugs. So I went with a lighter brown on that top part because I wanted these to look a little bit older and worn. But you could actually go with a darker brown. Start with something like shield brown maybe, if you wanted that to be a darker brown, like the old ceramic jugs when they were newer. So these ones I wanted to be pretty faded and worn. So you can see the ceramic jug. Like I said, I did think about putting the 3 X's on there, but I decided not to. So we got 2 of those done. Now we just got to do the ropes, and these donkeys are done. For our sun elf, we decorated the back on that quiver with some non-metallic metal gold. We got some elements of a dagger, buckles, and sword and scabbard with some non-metallic metal golds. On our merchant, we got some non-metallic metal golds. In the top of his walking cane, buckle, scabbard, around the gemstone. And then, oh, our dwarf, I almost forgot the highlights for our dwarf. Let's get him done real quick. I'm not going to take the time to put him on the paddle, just because I think we're okay. So he has that badge there, as well as a little bit of a buckle. There isn't much on this fellow just yet. So not much there. And then with our paladin, our Texas paladin, we did the shield, the sword, some buckles, as well as her hair. So at this point, we've got just one little dot of some tone to do on the handle of the shield, and then the cobblestones, and then she is ready to be sealed and will be all done. So getting closer on many of them. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you were able to take some time out of your day and just sit and paint with me here in the studio. Of course, don't hesitate to give us a follow, and we'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.